LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the May 12th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Happy Mother's Day to my mom, if I know sometimes she watches the recorded show. I picked out the weekend's 11 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. Although no NBC News Meet the Press. They say if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press, but the only Meet the Press, it was canceled for Mother's Day soccer? I don't know. But there actually was Meet the Press on Saturday Night Live last night. Their cold open was a Saturday Night Live parody, also parodying several Republicans. That's the first political comedy clip I'll show you in just a minute. The second political comedy clip will be from Weekend Update. Then one from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, his monologue. Weekend Update and Bill Maher, in some ways, did a more extensive news summary than the four remaining corporate news outlets that I take the news summaries from. There are only two news summaries, and they were, I don't know, some might say distracted by some foreign policy issues. Some might say that's more important than the ongoing constitutional crisis. You notice my two topics are, first, the Trump crisis, which includes the constitutional crisis with Congress, the trade war with China, Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, though mostly focusing on the constitutional crisis over obstruction of justice and the Mueller report. Then I'll have one clip at the end on my 2020 Democratic candidate update, where Jake Tapper checks. He's having a conversation, almost the whole program spent in a conversation with California Senator Kamala Harris, who's running for president. And for some reason, at one point, he gets a little bit paranoid and says, "Are you a cop? If you're a cop, you have to tell me you're a cop." Well, not exactly that, but you'll see he actually does ask her if she's a cop at the end there. But so is that political comedy? Not really. But the other thing I will talk with you about at the end, for those who are interested, last night I had the honor of briefly getting to meet William Shatner at a showing of Wrath of Khan here locally, and I'll have a brief description of how that went. You saw I was bravely, if you follow me on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, all like facebook.com/liberalviewer and twitter.com/liberalviewer. You already saw that, and my joke about having bravely stood next to Captain Kirk wearing a red shirt there. So that's my personal comedy, not really political. But here is the cold open from Saturday Night Live last night. I've edited together. I think the best impression was actually, or at least the most comedic, was the one I used in the thumbnail. It's Beck Bennett playing Mitch McConnell, although he had so much, there's so many turtle jokes about Mitch McConnell. And I don't know, they went after Chuck Todd's hair. Kyle Mooney was playing Chuck Todd at the beginning. You'll see. You think it's fair to go after his hair this way? You can let me know after we watch this 1 minute clip together over here.
Hello, I'm Chuck Todd, and welcome to Meet the Press. I hope you like my bangs. Something new I'm trying for the summer. Right. Which brings us to this week's topic. What would it take for President Trump to lose your support? I'm going to give you guys some hypothetical scenarios, and you tell me if any of them would be enough for the president to lose your support. What if you found out President Trump was a Muslim?
A Muslim? Oh, just the thought of that makes me want to stress eat.
Okay, now listen, you wait just a minute, Chuck. Now, what kind of Muslim are we talking about? Are we talking about like Dr. Oz?
No, I mean like Louis Farrakhan.
All right, but do we still get those tax cuts?
You do.
Okay. Well, then I guess it's Salam Alaikum, Brother President.
So I'm usually a Kate McKinnon fan. I didn't think her Lindsey Graham impression was all that great. Next week is the season finale of Saturday Night Live. I hope they have Alec Baldwin finally coming back to reprise his role as Donald Trump, or I don't know, maybe there will be no Alec Baldwin. I would bet on Alec Baldwin, but I guess we'll see. And I mean, I didn't think those were impressions that funny. The premise was kind of funny, and But why were they going after Chuck Todd's bangs? I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And then the next two clips are both news summaries from political comedy sources. First, Weekend Update. They actually covered something that only Saturday Night Live and Real Time covered of the corporate news media outlets. The 5 shows I take my clips from. There was no Meet the Press, but nobody covered the big New York Times story about Trump losing over $1 billion from, like, was it 85 to 94? That he was like the taxpayer who lost the most money in the United States. That's how bad the Trump presidency is going right now. That I mean, the economy is going pretty well for the moment, but the Trump presidency itself is in such bad condition that didn't even make any of the Sunday news shows, but they made fun of it over here on Weekend Update. And they also talked about Donald Trump Jr. getting a subpoena. I thought there were actually some good jokes here, which I will talk about with you. I cut out the Michael Che part, so there's Colin Jost and then Colin Jost again for about a minute and 48 seconds over here.
Well, guys, it turns out that Donald Trump may not be the financial genius that no one ever really thought he was. According to tax documents from 1985 to 1994, Trump appears to have lost, quote, more money than any other American taxpayer. And I love that during that period, when he was losing $1 billion, he had the audacity to write a book about how great he was at business. It's like if right now R. Kelly wrote a book on babysitting. But somehow there are still Trump supporters who are trying to spin this as a good thing. Look at this clip from Fox and Friends.
If anything, you read this and you're like, wow, it's pretty impressive, all the things that he's done in his life. It's beyond what most of us could ever achieve.
Come on, blonde lady. Even you don't believe that. I mean, you said the last part into your hand. It would be like if I said, oh, Donald Trump, he's just such a hardworking president. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who always looks like he's watching a man slowly drown. He said that the Mueller investigation is over and the Democrats should stop endlessly relitigating the 2016 election. Then he went back to trying to repeal Obamacare for literally the 55th time. Because McConnell always does what's best for the country. The Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee has subpoenaed Donald Trump Jr. to testify about his meeting with Russian officials. And so that he didn't feel left out, Eric got a subpoena from Detective Pikachu.
I actually saw Detective Pikachu this last week. My daughter wanted to see it, and so I went with her. I was never a Pokemon fan, but for someone who knows nothing about Pokemon, it wasn't a terrible movie. I like that detective. I don't know why people pick on Eric so much. It's like he seems to be one of the least nefarious of the Trump children. But at least compared to Donald Trump Jr. And like I said, you saw there that they covered the Donald Trump Jr. subpoena, which was not really covered. You'll see in the news summaries coming up, only CBS's Face the Nation covered in their questioning of Kevin McCarthy, which I'll show later, which had its own problems. But I thought that was pretty funny. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And now I'm going to show you a large part, by the way, you notice that there's a link, a bit.ly link that you see when I play the video. I have links down in the video description to the sources of all my clips, including Saturday Night Live and HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher monologue, all available for free on YouTube. Also down there, there's my clip list of my 11 clips. You can follow along my notes. I forgot to mention that. But here's the Bill Maher monologue that, like I said, kind of like the last clip, had a better news summary than I'm going to be able to show you from the corporate news analysis shows, the 4 that were left. Since Meet the Press usually has the best and longest news summary. But I think maybe Bill Maher had the best and longest one. This is about 3 minutes, a little over 3 minutes long. I even cut out a part about executive privilege. He makes a few mistakes in here. He calls someone he calls he says that Jerry Nadler is the ranking member when he's the chair of his committee, and then says Jerry Nadler wants to get the redacted Mueller report when he wants the unredacted Mueller report. He also says that it's actually the Senate Republicans who are to blame for there being no accountability, which I don't even know why that is. So there are a few factual mistakes in the news summary. There's some good jokes in here, which I'm not going to give away beforehand, but I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch. This is, like I said, I took out a little part of this, but otherwise it's very close to being the last 3 minutes of the full Bill Maher monologue. You can watch in full for yourself for free on YouTube at a link I put down in the video description, and I'll talk about it a little more after we watch together over here.
It's not really normal that the president's son is subpoenaed. He was subpoenaed yesterday, Don Jr. They want to ask questions about his meetings with the Russians, and Don Jr.'s not having it. That'll change things. No, Don Jr. said, again, I already lied about this. And he's not going to go anyway. I mean, the president has decided that laws don't apply to him. I mean, Donald Trump, with the help, never forget this could only happen with the help of the Republican Senate. He's been asserting executive privilege about the Mueller report, forbidding officials to testify, with blowing off subpoenas, just completely saying no, cock-blocking all the attempts to see his tax returns. It turns out we're not the resistance. He's the resistance. It's like if in Law and Order it began with, in our system, the people are represented by two separate groups. The Congress, who writes the laws, and the executive, who says, go fuck yourself. Can we see his taxes? No. Do we get to see the unredacted Mueller report? No. Are you having entanglements and making money from foreigners? Yet. I mean, no. It's his new favorite phrase, executive privilege. It's even better than white privilege. The ranking Democrat, Jerry Nadler, has been waiting all week and from last week to find out when he can see the redacted Mueller report. And he got his answer on Wednesday, when pigs fly out of Putin's ass. Barr wrote him a letter. He said, executive privilege, bitch, even though this doesn't remotely apply to this case. He might have invoked the infield fly rule. It would have been the same thing. It's like saying, teacher, you can't keep me after school. I have a note from Burger King. So Democrats voted this week to hold Barr in contempt. Shut up! It's not doing any good. Hold him. So what? He's the top law enforcement official in the country. Who's going to arrest him? Inspector Gadget? And then they went, and we might censure him. Oh, great. And don't forget to put a note on his windshield. It's Chinatown, Jake. That's what we're living in. America's China. And Democrats, they can't make any political hay out of any of this. It came out this week that from 1985 to 94, those 10 years, Trump lost more money than anybody else in America. And paid no tax. Really, Democrats? You can't do anything about that? Elizabeth Warren, start calling him Brocahontas. Something.
I like that. I like the Brocahontas. I actually think if Elizabeth Warren starts to pick up steam, that maybe she should steal that from Bill Maher. They actually showed that Hillary Clinton's, last week Bill Maher was showing how Hillary Clinton stole this. China, if you're listening, get Trump's tax returns from something Bill Maher did a while back. But yeah, Brocahontas, because I actually, as I've said multiple times, I voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary last time, Hillary Clinton in the general election. But Bernie Sanders was my candidate in 2016 in the primaries here in California that I voted for. I haven't decided who to vote for. It seems that in some ways Elizabeth Warren is the one who's put out the most policies. I don't agree with all of them, but I agree with a lot of them, and and they're actually very similar to Bernie Sanders, and I really appreciate someone who puts out detailed policies. She's like the policy wonk of all of the 20 plus candidates. I'm kind of worried about the whole Pocahontas thing, which is a racist slur, and I like the Pocahontas comeback. It might help destigmatize I don't know how well that label will work for Trump, but anyway, you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And as I said, that was like over 3 minutes from Bill Maher's monologue summarizing the whole constitutional crisis with Congress in a better way than I think you get from any of the news analysis shows, also covering the over $1 billion loss that was revealed by the New York Times from Donald Trump in the 80s and 90s when he was claiming to be such a business genius, which doesn't show up in these news summaries. There was no NBC News Meet the Press, which usually has the best and longest news summary. Instead, I guess the best and longest one is this slightly over 1 minute long news summary from George Stephanopoulos on ABC's This Week, where they talk briefly about the constitutional crisis. It's, I already said how long it is, and that was the topic that I thought, that was the focus that I wanted to put on the news this week, even though there's China and there's Venezuela and there's North Korea, which I will talk about a little more when I show the next news summary. But here's the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary from this morning for us to watch together over here.
Good morning. Welcome to This Week, and to all the moms watching today, happy Mother's Day. As we come on the air, the battle between President Trump and congressional Democrats has broken out into all-out war. A brand new analysis in the Washington Post shows the White House is blocking 20 separate congressional investigations by filing lawsuits, stopping aides from testifying, refusing dozens of requests for documents. Stonewalling on a scale that Democrats say amounts to a constitutional crisis.
The president is almost self-impeaching because he is every day demonstrating more obstruction of justice and disrespect for Congress's legitimate role.
The president defiant, calling the congressional investigations pure politics that will put him back in the White House.
They want to do investigations instead of investments. They want to do what they're doing, which looks so foolish, and maybe I read it wrong, but I think it drives us right on to victory in 2020.
And we begin this week with one of the Democratic chairmen leading an investigation.
I think that was Representative Adam Schiff, and I do have a clip of Adam Schiff later talking about what Democrats can actually do, kind of in response to what Bill Maher was saying, where Democrats can't do anything, and I'll talk about that more when I show the Adam Schiff clip, which, if you're following along on this clip list that there's a link to down in the video description, that's the clip number 10, second to last clip before I get to the Jake Tapper asking Kamala Harris, are you a cop? I'm worried you're a cop. No, he's not worried, but are you a cop? He does ask her that. And but before I get to that, I have one more news summary. This is even shorter and even less focus on the facts of the Trump versus Congress, Trump constitutional crisis, because it talks, the state. Jake Tapper always starts off with what's the State of the Union this week. Well, the State of the Union this week is wondering how it's all going to play out, is the State of the Union, and it's Trump's standoff at home and abroad. So it's all like lumped together, the Trump versus Congress, Trump versus China, and you'll see Venezuela, North Korea, all in less than a minute from CNN this morning over here.
Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is wondering how this is all going to play out. President Trump is in Washington this morning, and he's facing standoffs at home and abroad. On the international stage, the president is confronting escalating crises in 4 global hotspots: Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, and with China, after negotiators failed to reach a deal Friday to avert a potential trade war. Back at home, the president is up and tweeting about the Russia investigation already today, after a week in which his standoff with Democrats in Congress seemed to reach a new level, as the White House looks to block Democratic oversight at every turn. Both the Speaker of the House and the Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee are openly calling this a constitutional crisis. But But the White House appears to be betting that stonewalling Congress will not hurt the president politically. All this as the president is clearly feeling the pressure on 2020. And this morning, we're bringing you a special exclusive interview with one of the top Democratic presidential candidates. We went to Oakland,
California, to Jack London Square. I was just there a few weeks ago. I go to the Bay Area a lot. It's only about an hour and a half away from where I live, so it's not that big a deal. And Jake Tapper also didn't put that much work into State of the Union this morning. Most of the program was taken up by this pre-recorded interview with Kamala Harris, and I will have a couple clips of that coming up. He did cover the constitutional crisis, but like I said, the CNN and ABC news summaries there that you just watched, not really all as many facts as you got from Bill Maher, and maybe even not from Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update if you watch the whole thing, which is kind of a sad state of affairs, that the political comedy is giving you more facts about the Trump scandals of the week. Or, I don't know, you can look at it the other way, that they, at least CNN, focused very heavily on the foreign policy conflicts and the trade war with China. That was also the news summary from Fox News Sunday that I'm not showing you, was all about China and North Korea and the foreign policy conflicts. I mean, it wasn't very long, but there was nothing about the constitutional crisis. They did have sort of a teaser about it where it was all about how Nancy Pelosi says that there might be a constitutional crisis, and then they asked Seth Moulton, this centrist Democrat who's running for president, a member of Congress. He was a guest on Fox News Sunday, and Chris Wallace asks him about the Mueller report, but it's all about how first there's this like I said, the teaser, and then asking Seth Moulton about whether we need to move on from the Mueller report, and if Democrats are making a mistake. And he does say, he does focus on Russian meddling, but what's really missing from, you'll hear the word obstruction very briefly from Seth Moulton at the end, and that was the thing that was missing. They basically accept that there's no collusion and no obstruction is the verdict of the Mueller report, which, if you watched my live stream right after the Mueller report came out, the title was Collusion! Obstruction. There was no criminal conspiracy with Russia, but there was plenty of collusion, and there was also very substantial evidence of obstruction, which never was talked about this week on Fox News Sunday. Very rarely gets talked about on Fox News. And this is the closest they got in the 3-minute clip that I will talk about with you. Like I said, it's the teaser before Seth Moulton, and then the question that Chris Wallace asks Seth Moulton that I think is evidence of Fox News bias that I'll talk about with you after we watch together over here.
Coming up, Democrats accuse the president of stonewalling Congress.
He is every day demonstrating more obstruction of justice and disrespect for Congress's legitimate role.
We'll ask a top Democrat what they can do about it next. All right, let's turn to the battle now, the escalating battle between the House and the White House over the Russia investigation and where it goes from here. The president is fighting all subpoenas for documents and current and former advisors to testify before Congress, and the House Democrats are fighting back, either in one case voting in a committee for contempt of Congress and others threatening to vote. Here was the president's reaction to that.
With all of this transparency, we finish no collusion, no obstruction, right? Then I get out the first day, they're saying, let's do it again. And I said, that's enough. We have to run a country.
Does President Trump have a point? I mean, the Mueller investigation went on for 22 months. It cast a cloud over his presidency in this country for almost 2 years. it was, look, nobody on your side is ever going to be satisfied with the Mueller investigation, but why not go on and deal with pocketbook issues that really affect people's lives? Voters are going to decide in a little over a year in the 2020 election whether they want to keep President Trump or not.
Well, first of all, don't think that we can't do both. I mean, the Democratic House has been passing a lot of legislation that's important to American families. But it's also our constitutional responsibility to hold the administration accountable. That's written into the Constitution. And the fact of the matter is that this investigation is exactly what you termed it first, Chris. It's an investigation about Russia. And whether you're a Democrat in the House or you're the biggest Trump supporter in America, every American should want to know why Vladimir Putin wanted Trump elected president.
But you're not
That's the most
investigating.
important
But the House Democratic investigations are not about Russia. They're about Trump. You're subpoenaing him, well, not him, but some of his top people, Barr, McGahn. This is not about Russia. It's about Trump.
Well, we need to hold the Trump administration accountable because that's our constitutional duty. But you're right in criticizing us for not focusing enough on Russia. I mean, that's why I'm in this race, to talk about national security, because Democrats should be leading on national security when we have a president who is literally cozying up to some of the worst dictators in the world, some of our biggest enemies. I do think, Chris, that you're right, that should be the focus, because that is the unmistakable conclusion of this report. Obstruction and everything else aside, those are really important. But Russia meddled in this election. And don't get me wrong, they're going to meddle in 2020 as well, because this administration has done nothing to stop them or deter them.
So you heard briefly Nancy Pelosi mention obstruction in the clip they showed in the teaser at the beginning, and then Seth Moulton very briefly at the end also mentioned obstruction of justice. But it was all about Russia, and he kind of accepted the Fox News premise of no collusion. He said obstruction was important, but really we have to focus on Russian meddling and national security. And he later talked about being an Iraq war veteran, which I don't know, that he might be like is he running to be like the centrist war veteran white male vice president for like Kamala Harris or something? I don't know. Is that too much identity politics? Foreshadowing of what's going to happen? I don't know. I'm not a fan of Kamala Harris, and I'll explain that when I showed the last clip where Jake Tapper asks if she's a cop. But I actually want to move on to the one CBS Face the Nation clip I have, which is even worse in terms of not contradicting the Republican narrative about no collusion and no obstruction. Margaret Brennan didn't do a news summary. Her first guest that she went to immediately was the House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy. That means he's the top Republican in the House of Representatives. He's from California. I'm not a big fan of Kevin McCarthy. I know his record well over many years, and if the Republicans retake the House of Representatives, he's going to be the Speaker of the House. So pay attention to this guy. And he is really good at giving this Republican narrative, the no collusion, no obstruction. Right before the clip I'm going to show you, he actually said that Mueller did his 2-year investigation, found no evidence. He actually says no evidence. I don't know if he's a subscriber to that clip from Giuliani I showed a couple weeks ago where he said there's no evidence in the Mueller report, there's stuff. It's not evidence, it's stuff. But he doesn't actually go that far. But you'll see Margaret Brennan, to her credit, she is talking about the Republican Senate giving a subpoena to Donald Trump Jr. And that was one of the few places it got brought up on the Sunday morning news analysis shows this morning. But she never in any way contradicts the new no collusion talking point from Kevin McCarthy, never even contradicts the no obstruction. She does bring up some other Trump stonewalling at the end, but not in the most effective way, as I will discuss with you after we watch this 2.5-minute clip from CBS's Face the Nation this morning. Margaret Brennan questioning the top-ranking Republican in the House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy from California over here.
Jobs being offered and people actually looking.
Foreign power interfered in our democracy. That was the purpose of this probe.
Yeah, but you just had that answered by the Mueller report. There was no collusion and there's no obstruction.
But Senator Marco Rubio, who sits on this Intelligence Committee, has said Republicans who are criticizing this are fundamentally misunderstanding the intent of the committee investigation, that it is focused on this question of a foreign power interfering. The intent is to move towards legislation that can prevent it from happening again, or at least make it harder. Doesn't that have merit?
Look, the idea of a foreign entity trying to move into our elections is something Republicans have been working on for quite some time. We were the ones that pushed Obama, who ignored our concerns of what was going forward when he was president. This is something Republicans have stood up for a long time. But the question that the Mueller report has already answered, so why do you prolong that? If you want to look at entities that are trying to get into our elections, yes, that is something we've always worked on. But Donald Trump Jr. has already testified for more than 27 hours. If you want to bring him back in because something Cohen has said when he is in jail for lying and talking about a meeting he wasn't even in, no, I don't think that's right. But it's not going to change the outcome of what this investigation has already done and the power behind the Mueller investigation. That's the concern that I have.
So do you disagree then with some of your fellow Republicans who say they want to investigate the origins of the investigation?
No, I think that's very important from the origin of the investigation.
So it's not time to move on?
No, it's time to move on. Was there obstruction? No. Was there collusion? No. But why did we even get to this point? Why did the dossier get to that point? What were the communications? You got an IG report coming in. That's going to be very important. But you never want America to have to live through this again. You don't want to have a president on any side of the aisle have to go through what we just went through again. So I think from that instance, that's where Attorney General Barr is looking, and I think that's appropriate.
So not all of these investigations are about Mueller.
Yes.
You have, in the Democratic-led House, 20 or so investigations underway. Some of them, though, and we can put up on the screen some of the scope of these investigations. There are things like security clearances and whether those are being handled properly. These were questions that Republicans had when they held the majority. So don't you think there are some investigations here with merit?
There are some with merit. And if you look at our ranking member, Jim...
So at least Margaret Brennan asked about that Washington Post story about the 20 ongoing investigations, some of which have nothing to do with the Mueller report, you know, the family separation, the security clearances, and Trump has stonewalled all of those. No witnesses to testify, no documents, no congressional oversight. And so Margaret Brennan brought that up, but then let Kevin McCarthy get away with saying, and the very end of the question was like, well, even Republicans think this is have mentioned some of these topics, and they're the real arbiters of truth, right? I mean, that was almost, well, at least for Kevin McCarthy. So maybe that isn't such a criticism. But then when Kevin McCarthy started to say, yeah, we really do care about some of these things, she never really followed up asking about how Trump has stonewalled completely on non-Mueller related, on even like the security clearance issue, saying no documents, no witnesses, total stonewall, and that was not a follow-up there. And I think before I showed the clip, I pretty much criticized Margaret Brennan sufficiently for never following up on the no collusion, no obstruction. Even if you believe, I mean, collusion isn't conspiracy to commit a crime, but there's plenty of collusion, just no conspiracy to commit a crime with the Russians. And obstruction, I mean, there's substantial evidence. That's what the Mueller report says, substantial evidence of obstruction that Congress can take up if they want to fulfill their traditional role of checking corruption in the executive branch. I mean, how much more clear could Mueller be? Well, I guess we'll find out if he testifies. They were saying May 15th. Well, we'll see when Mueller actually testifies, but that's something to look forward to. And anyway, the next clip I want to show is another Republican who doesn't understand obstruction of justice. Here, this is Rand Paul over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, talking to George Stephanopoulos. And he not only is trying to exonerate Trump, he's trying to exonerate Martha Stewart. And he confuses obstruction of justice with lying to the FBI. He's asked about obstruction of justice by George Stephanopoulos, and then immediately switches to the facts of what National Security Advisor Michael Flynn did, lying to the FBI. And George Stephanopoulos doesn't really follow up on the fact that he switched from obstruction of justice to lying to the FBI, and instead follows up with this whole Martha Stewart thing that you'll see Rand Paul apparently is a Martha Stewart fan, which I'll talk about a little more with you after we watch that 1-minute clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos together over here.
Well, as you know, there's no requirement that there being an underlying crime for obstruction of justice to exist. And you've got something like 800 former federal prosecutors who say they believe that the president would be prosecuted if indeed he weren't president right now. So you're not concerned about that at all?
I think most Americans would disagree with that. I think most Americans would disagree with that. Most Americans would hate the idea that you're called in to talk to the FBI, and when you're called in, they say, oh, you know, what did you say on the phone to somebody 2 months ago? And if you describe that inaccurately, then the government's going to say, oh, we're going to put you in jail even though there was no crime committed. No, people are horrified by the idea that you could put someone in jail for obstructing justice on something where you didn't commit the crime. Think about it from the perspective of the president.
Isn't that exactly what happened to Martha Stewart?
Well, yeah, and it was wrong. What they did to Martha Stewart was an abomination. So when you're accused falsely of a crime and you try to defend yourself, should you then be accused of another crime for trying to defend yourself against false accusations? I think it's absurd.
How about this charge from Democrats?
So if you try to defend, if you're falsely accused of a crime, and if you read the Mueller report, of course, Mueller says that Trump, at the time he was when Mueller was appointed, he thought that he like slumped in his chair and said, I'm effed, or I'm fucked, whatever. And this is the worst day of my presidency, or, you know, and in the Mueller report, they say, well, he may have thought that, like the whole, all the contacts with Russia, the Trump Tower meeting, he may have thought that that was going to be charged as a crime. So he may have thought he had criminal liability when the Mueller report didn't find enough evidence to be able to charge him. So that's one reason that you might obstruct justice even though there's no underlying charged crime. The obstruction of justice may have been successful, and that's also in the Mueller report, that there are certain things he couldn't find out because the Trump campaign, they deleted text messages and messages through apps, and Trump himself wouldn't testify and said, I don't know, I don't recall, like 30 times. And so there's that, you know, there may be no underlying crime charge because the obstruction of justice was actually successful. And then you may obstruct the investigation because you think it's going to find out something that's embarrassing but not illegal, which is something the Mueller report also talks about. So that whole Rand Paul argument was completely bogus. Down in the video description, I have many links to the statutes regarding obstruction of justice, and also to this Congressional Research Service document that's like 80 pages long, something like that, all about obstruction of justice. And if you read that, you'll understand that Rand Paul's argument was totally bogus, and George Stephanopoulos didn't really follow up that well. But the next clip I want to show, or I have I have two more clips on the Trump crisis topic before I get to Kamala Harris being asked by Jake Tapper if she's a cop. And the next one is actually Jake Tapper talking to Kamala Harris about whether there is a constitutional crisis, and she does a little bit better job than Seth Moulton, but she's not like the warrior to get Trump that I'm looking for in the Senate, I guess, if the House impeaches Trump. But I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip from CNN's State of the Union, Jake Tapper's interview of Kamala Harris over here.
Nancy Pelosi and the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, they say that we're in a constitutional crisis because the Justice Department's not turning over the full unredacted Mueller report and the underlying materials. Do you agree? Are we in a constitutional crisis?
I think we probably are. I mean, listen, a constitutional crisis is defined as generally when the system that we set up with the checks and balances when each of the independent co-equal branches of government fails to perform its duties. And I think that we are seeing a breakdown of responsibilities. We saw it last week in the Barr hearing. We're seeing it in terms of a failure to comply with subpoenas. Now being a member of the United States Congress and the Senate, I am seeing up close where there is a failure to respect the significance of Congress's duty to perform a role of oversight over the administration, over the agencies. I'm seeing a failure to appreciate the importance of testifying before Congress in a way that is straightforward and truthful. So I think, yes, I think it is fair to say that we are looking at a crisis, not only of confidence, but potentially a constitutional crisis. Yeah.
President Trump, as you know, slapped higher tariffs on Chinese.
So at least the answer from Kamala Harris there was yes, there is a constitutional crisis. And she talked a little bit about some of the things the Trump administration is doing that are messing up our constitutional system. Whether it's a constitutional crisis depends on your definition. I mean, it still has the ability. There are like two branches fighting, the executive versus the legislative, and then we still have the judicial coming up that may slowly or possibly more quickly resolve the issue. And then if the executive doesn't obey the order of the judicial, that would be a constitutional crisis, a severe one. Now we have kind of like a building constitutional crisis as the legislative and executive start to battle things out. So that's how I would term it. By the way, there's a link down in the video description where I can send you your own ACLU Constitution, which you can read and decide if there's a constitutional crisis. If you give me a $5 contribution through PayPal down there, or a $5 monthly subscription through Patreon, I give you this weatherproof vinyl #LiberalViewer sticker. And at the $10 level, you get the sticker and the ACLU Constitution. There's actually, it's a special ACLU Constitution. In the back, it has a Know Your Rights with the Police section, among other things. So that by itself is worth the $10, right? It's a $10 contribution to help support future Liberal Viewer videos, so I thought I would throw that in, talking about the Constitution momentarily. But the last clip I want to show you before I get to one more Kamala Harris clip about whether she's a cop or not, but the last clip I want to show you on the topic of the Trump crisis, this is Adam Schiff giving a much stronger presentation of what Congress can actually do if the Trump administration will not obey subpoenas, won't send witnesses, won't send documents from the normal process of congressional oversight. I think this is better than what Seth Moulton said, better than what Kamala Harris said, and here's Adam Schiff talking about what those options are for Congress, including the courts, but including a way that fines that create a risk even before the courts rule, that I'll talk about after we watch that clip together over here.
What can you do about it? I know that you've talked about under the Congress's power for inherent contempt that you can maybe fine officials. You're not going to get a U.S. attorney to prosecute the attorney general after you hold him or any other official in contempt. So what can you do? How can you be effective?
Well, we're going to have to enforce so much of this in court, and we're seeing signs already, and I think this is positive, that the courts understand the urgency here. In the first case to get to the court involving the accountants, the House Oversight Committee, the judge has said, essentially, we're going to expedite the schedule. I'm going to give you a quick judgment on it. And look, we are going to have to consider other remedies like inherent contempt, where if the courts take too long, we use our own judicial process within the Congress. And look, I think if you fine someone $25,000 a day to their person, until they comply, it gets their attention.
If you can collect.
Well, if you can collect, but it affects, whether they're going to be facing ultimately hundreds of thousands of dollars of damages. I don't know how many are going to want to take that risk for Donald Trump. But we're going to have to use that device if necessary. We're going to have to use the power of the purse if necessary. We're going to have to enforce our ability to do oversight.
What more and more of your colleagues are saying in the face.
So I think there's some good ideas in there, and the idea of, fining people a significant amount of money per day for them personally being liable if they don't obey the lawful subpoenas of the House of Representatives. Even if the courts don't rule quickly, that creates a risk of, people don't want to, they don't know how the courts are going to rule, and they don't want to end up owing hundreds of thousands of dollars that certainly Donald Trump's not going to give them the money, right? Or I don't know, maybe he would. But that would be obstruction of justice, wouldn't it? Well, you can read the obstruction of justice links I was talking about earlier and find out for yourself. But Adam Schiff, I think, explained that pretty well, and also talked about that one recent court case where the judge has expedited the congressional action against the Trump administration. That bodes well, but it depends on the federal judge. Some of them are Democratic judges and some are Republican because our courts are so partisan at this point, I guess. But anyway, that's the last clip in the Trump crisis topic, and then I have one clip in the Democratic presidential candidate for 2020 update section. This is the Kamala Harris interview with Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union in Jack London Square in Oakland. They never said it was Jack London Square, but it was immediately recognizable to me, having been to Jack London Square several times in Oakland, including a few weeks ago for the ACLU 100 exhibition there. And like I said, well, first, Kamala Harris is one of the top contenders for the Democratic presidential nomination because of the way California has moved up its primary to March. It used to be in June all the time, and it was, that's when I voted for Bernie Sanders in 2016, and it was pretty much decided by that point. And California usually votes when it's decided or pretty much decided, but now it's part of Super Tuesday in March, and Kamala Harris is hoping that because she's a senator from California, she'll have a good day on Super Tuesday in California in March. And there's a large African American Democratic voting population in South Carolina, which is the third big contest after Iowa and New Hampshire. And for I think Nevada's early also. Maybe it's Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina. I can't remember. But anyway, Kamala Harris is a top contender because of the scheduling. And I don't know. I am not a fan of hers because before she was a senator in California, she was a prosecutor in San Francisco, and she was attorney general, and both of those are prosecutorial. And as a former criminal defense attorney, former public defender, I'm not saying I would never vote for a former prosecutor for an elective office, but former prosecutors, they're cops, and for me that is kind of pejorative because of look over my shoulder here at the new Jim Crow and mass incarceration. They're complicit in the mass incarceration system, and Kamala Harris has a history as a prosecutor here in California that is turning off progressives, even though she's a black woman. And her sister, Maya Harris, when I've been on the board of the ACLU of Northern California, all opinions I'm expressing are my own, of course, but I've been on the board of the ACLU of Northern California for like 12 years now. And when I started, Kamala Harris's sister, Maya Harris, now chair of her campaign, she was executive director of the ACLU of Northern California. Very progressive, if Maya Harris was running, I'd have a whole different outlook. But Kamala Harris, I think she has a prosecutorial mass incarceration cop history that I haven't heard enough to overcome that, and it's going to take a lot. And I didn't hear it in this answer, where first you'll see Jake Tapper asks her about her program on truancy, and she claims, the fact that first, I never put any parents in jail for having truant children, which is a terrible, terrible thing to do. So at least she didn't do that. But then she supported this bill that would have made it easier to put parents in jail for longer, and claims that's an unintended consequence. But maybe she didn't intend it, but people like the ACLU knew at the time that this was a bad bill. And then, as I've been promoting throughout this live stream, you'll see Jake Tapper in his follow-up asks her, "Are you a cop? Progressives think you're a cop." That's not pejorative to Jake Tapper. I explained kind of, because of the whole mass incarceration system, why I think it's it is pejorative. So that's the real follow-up question from Jake Tapper. And this is the final news clip. It's about 3.5 minutes long from CNN's State of the Union. And I'll talk about it with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Let me ask you about your record as a prosecutor. The truancy initiative is something that you've had to answer some questions about, which threatened prosecution for parents of students who miss too much school. You told a story in a 2010 speech about a homeless single mother with 3 kids working 2 jobs you sent under your truancy initiative. Her children's attendance improved, and you dismissed charges that you had filed against her. Now, can you explain to people who are skeptical why threatening her with jail time was the right way to handle that problem?
Well, it was more about getting her the services that she needed and didn't know was available. It was more about putting pressure on the school district to do its job. I learned that over 80% of the prisoners in the United States are high school dropouts. I learned that a black man between the age of, I think it's 20 and 25, if a high school dropout, was 2/3 likely to be in jail, have been in jail, or dead. And so, looking at the issue, I realized that there is a very direct connection between the issue of truancy and who will end up in the criminal justice system. So the first thing we did is go to the school district and say, what are you doing to get these parents the support they need, to get their children to school every day? What are we doing as a community? And it is because we put those resources into this initiative and put the spotlight that I was able to bring to it, frankly, we were able to improve attendance by over 30%. Not one parent was sent to jail.
Well, you pushed for a statewide law, right? A statewide truancy law, and people were thrown into jail under that law.
Not by me.
Not by you, but you supported the law.
I supported the law this is what I supported, and our initiative was that here's, we're going to get in the weeds, but give me the patience of time to explain it. When I was looking at the issue of truancy, I realized that when we defined truancy, we defined it as 3 or 4 unexcused absences, you're truant. I was seeing kids that were missing up to 80 days of a 180-day school year. So my point was, why isn't the education code recognizing that? What ended up happening is by changing the education code, it also, by reference then was in the penal code. And then that was an unintended consequence. And if I could do it over again, I would have made sure that it would not have increased penalties or the ability to prosecute anywhere in the state to prosecute parents, because that was never the intention, and it was never anything that I did.
Do you think that, I mean, you hear this more than I do, but I hear from Democratic voters, progressives out there, they say they learn a little bit, they like you, they hear about you, they like you, they learn more, and then they say, she's a cop.
Hey, look.
And look, where I come from, that's not pejorative. But in some communities, it is.
Well, listen, this is how I feel about it. I am acutely aware of the impact of the criminal justice system on communities, both in terms of what the criminal justice system can do to rightly make sure there is consequence and accountability when a woman is raped, when a child is molested, when one human being kills another human being. And I will never apologize for prosecuting people for those crimes. I am also acutely aware that we have a criminal justice system in America that is deeply flawed, has often been informed by bias, and is in need of severe reform, which is why my entire career, I have worked to do both.
We're just 30 miles away from the Facebook headquarters?
My entire career, I've worked to do both. I'm not sure what to engage in mass incarceration, but also recognize the bias in the system. I don't know. Like I said, I saw Tom Trask, I think, in the comments I read while Kamala Harris was talking there, saying that Amy Klobuchar was also a prosecutor. Yes, I know that. I kind of like Amy Klobuchar for the way she behaved in the Kavanaugh hearings, but also the thing is, Kamala Harris is from California, so I know her record as a prosecutor in San Francisco and as Attorney General, and every time I hear her try to explain one of those things, like the truancy law that she supported with unintended consequences, I think, well, we all knew those consequences. We talked about those consequences at the time that bill was up for debate, and it may have been unintended by her, but that's I just don't buy that it wasn't. They were known consequences, even if she didn't intend them, and they were known consequences before the truancy bill passed. And every time I hear Kamala Harris try to explain something like that, it just doesn't ring true for me. And Amy Klobuchar, I just don't know Minnesota as well as California because I live in California, but I'm just worried that all the same things are true. Of course, any of the 20-plus Democratic nominees I would support over the current president, Donald Trump. I just want to point that out. But whoever ends up getting the nomination, anything that you find me saying during these live streams that's critical, it pales in comparison to the damage to our republic, our democratic republic, being done by our current president. I guess I just have to throw that in just in case my criticisms come back to haunt me. Seems a very low probability event. But anyway, I'm going to finish up the show now, but I did promise I do have a bonus Dash and Sandy clip. Sandy's lying down right over there, sleeping right now. But before that, I promised I would give a few more details about this picture of me bravely standing in a red shirt next to the original Captain Kirk, William Shatner, last night. I live in Sacramento. UC Davis is a University of California. Davis is a nearby university. They had a showing of Wrath of Khan, followed by a discussion between William Shatner and the chancellor of the university. And then there was a photo op that you could opt into that I did for me and my family after the discussion, where I got to take this picture with William Shatner wearing a red shirt. And one of the weird things was, I really enjoyed the discussion after Wrath of Khan. It was actually an extended version with a few scenes I'd never seen before, even though I've seen that movie like 10 times. And then William Shatner, I heard he was kind of like a jerk or an asshole. A lot of people have said that, but he actually was nicer than I expected, and he was very loquacious, a great storyteller. There was one story he told that was really like an old joke that he pretended was something that happened to him, so that made me think some of the things he was saying weren't necessarily true. They were just like, he likes to tell stories to entertain audiences. And then the one weird thing at the end, for like when I took this picture and some of the other pictures, you notice they informed us before we took the pictures, Mr. Shatner will not hold your props, no handshaking, and no physical contact. Although I looked at, I downloaded the pictures from the picture-taking site, and a lot of people did like put their arm around or touch his shoulder, but I was like, I'm a stickler for consent, I guess, and I was totally freaked out by like the instructions not to like touch William Shatner in any way. But he was nicer than I expected, and I said, when I saw him, I said, it's an honor, and then I introduced my daughter, and actually that picture that here is the picture that I took with me and my daughter, but I cropped my daughter out because I don't want to publicly show her picture without her consent, or because I'm a stickler for consent, like I said. But anyway, it was really fun, and I've been a fan of Star Trek basically my entire life, and one of my earliest memories is of a Star Trek episode, original Star Trek. I think it was The Man Trap is the title, because I remember the salt monster. It was like really scary to me when I don't know if it was when it originally aired or one of the early reruns because it aired when I was very, very young. But anyway, that's the extra information about that picture that I promised at the beginning of the show. And just to finish up, I hope you enjoyed all the clips I picked out. I also appreciate I got 2 Super Chat contributions from Lulu Girl. I took a picture of one of them. I just saw there was a second one. But I wanted... Where did it go? Where'd it go? Uh-oh. I wanted to show the one Super Chat contribution from Lulu Girl commenting on my praise of Elizabeth Warren. She is one of my top possible choices. Here it is. So thanks for that comment about Elizabeth Warren supporting. Like I said, I haven't decided who would. I'm a registered Democrat, but I haven't decided which presidential candidate I'm supporting yet. I voted for Bernie Sanders, which I decided kind of at the last minute in 2016. Way back in 2008, I think it was in February 2007, after I saw Barack Obama give his announcing speech in Illinois. I was a supporter of Barack Obama very early on, like in 2007, but I haven't decided yet. But thanks for that comment, Lulu Girl. I appreciate all the live comments and the Super Chat contributions, the PayPal contributions I get directly at the link down in the video description, and especially the monthly patrons on Patreon. There's a link down in the video description to that, you know, I have a certain amount that I can kind of depend on month to month. And so if you enjoy all the clips I picked out, the commentary and criticism I've added, that's a way you can support the video. You can also give me a thumbs up, supportive comment. And also for the Dash and Sandy fans, it's hard to get Dash and Sandy together, except when I refilled Sandy's water bowl, Dash is very aggressive at being the first to drink from it, will continue drinking from it even when Sandy comes in to eat her food. And that's the Dash and Sandy clip I got to finish the show for you over here. So you got to look from Dash, a look from Sandy, and dogs and cats living together. Isn't that like Ghostbusters 2, Bill Murray, The Sign of the Apocalypse, dogs and cats living together? Well, there you have it. If the Trump administration isn't a sign of the apocalypse, that's the Bill Murray Ghostbusters 2 endorsed Sign of the Apocalypse. And anyway, I hope you appreciate all of those clips and all the commentary, and I've enjoyed reading the live comments, and I'm sure I will enjoy reading the comments from the viewers of my recorded show. And until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.